What's up, guys? Welcome to episode 3 of Cardboard from Mars. I'm Nima. As always, this is Nate.
Today we're going to continue our discussion about strategy archetypes. We're going to talk about the space and titanium strategy, the ground game strategy, and the economic strategy.
All right, let's get into it.
Okay, so let's get right to it. So the first strategy that we're going to talk about today is the space and titanium strategy. And basically that involves using titanium resources to play space cards.
Right, so space cards are generally really high cost and really high effect. So they might include asteroids, they might include space stations, things like that. Generally they're going to be huge bang, but also a huge buck, right?
Right, and that, basically if you think about titanium as being driving an economic engine, it has the highest reward in the sense that each titanium is worth 3 credits, and the cards that boost your titanium are generally undercosted for that value.
Right. Yeah, so generally if you're trying to get space cards down, you want as high titanium production as you can possibly get. It's going to help you so much in the long run. Now, the other way to play space cards, if you don't have a titanium engine, is a money engine, right?
An economic engine, and that is its own different strategy. While the titanium engine has a higher potential reward, it does come with some limitations in the sense that you can only use that money to pay for space cards.
Right.
Unlike in the economic engine, which gives you maximum flexibility but for a little less impact.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. You're with titanium, you're locking yourself into a strategy. Right, whereas with a general economic engine, you can do anything. So
yeah,
that's a good point.
So some of the ways that you might get into this strategy are if you have a few cards in your opening hand that are things that boost your titanium or big payoffs for titanium, such as satellites, for example, which can just be a hugely impactful card in the mid-game. Other cards that can really drive your titanium engine are advanced alloys. Space station is another good one.
Yeah, if you can get advanced alloys out and you have a good titanium engine, it's godlike.
Yeah.
I mean, you were just going to dominate. You can get space cards out so cheaply, and I'm not sure there's not anything anyone can do about it at that point,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah, particularly if you're like Phobolog with advanced alloys.
Right.
It gets pretty out of control. But generally, you want to have some of these cards in your opening hand because the advantage that you generate with your titanium engine, it really amplifies over time, sort of like compounding interest or something like that. Like you want to have those cards early, probably in the first 1 to 4 generations to really maximize the value.
Totally, and you can get some early cards like mining rights, for example, that will just give you a small boost in your titanium strategy, and that's a really good place to start. You don't have to go huge like with IO, I think it's IO mining. So yeah, I think that's a really good way to go. Another nice card to have with titanium strategy is Security Fleet. So Security Fleet, basically you just have to spend a titanium to put a fighter onto your card, right? And each fighter is worth a point at the end of the game. I played a game where this card netted me like 9-10 points at the end of the game. That's insane. For one card to give you that many points, it's crazy. Now it does cost 1 titanium each turn, but if you have a good enough engine, it's so worth it.
Oh, I totally agree. I think the first time that I saw Security Fleet, I thought it was, not a very good card.
Right.
But if it costs 12, and let's say you get 6 points out of it, so you gave up 18 credits worth of titanium. Altogether, you paid 30 credits for 6 points. Like that's still a pretty good deal.
Totally, yeah.
Right. So that's a card that's definitely worth noting. In terms of what does this strategy go with, because boosting your titanium isn't really a strategy in a vacuum. It's really an economy, and so then you have to figure out a way to turn that into points. Typically, this pairs very well with the Jupiter strategy,
right?
Because a lot of the Jupiter cards are space cards.
And they have titanium production on them a lot.
That's right.
So there's super good synergy there.
It's worth noting, though, that you don't have to be in a Jupiter strategy to make the space titanium strategy work. Another very notable pairing is event cards. So some of the big asteroids and comets and things like that, basically all of those are space cards. And many of those cards actually generate titanium, and so you can use it to sort of chain together several big event cards in a row.
Right, yeah, totally. I mean, like I was saying earlier, the space cards are the most powerful cards in the game. And some of the events, they can raise your terraforming rating by 4 or 5 in one go. So if you can bring those out cheaply, it's super good.
Yeah, and I actually think that the titanium and space strategy pairs best with the event cards for that very reason.
Totally.
Because a lot of times, if you eschew terraforming, bumping the terraforming in the early part of the game to build up your titanium production, you'll get behind on the terraforming rating.
Right.
And so
Certainly.
a lot of the big Jupiter cards, they don't actually help you bump the terraforming rating, whereas these big comet cards and event cards do. So if you spend the early part of the game developing your engine, you need a way to catch up on the terraforming, and those big event cards are a perfect way to do so.
Yeah, that's a good point. On the flip side, the things that this strategy doesn't go very well with, one would probably be the ground game. A lot of these cards don't give you a very good way to get plants or cities down. It just doesn't, that makes sense, right? We're talking space. There's not a lot of ground in space.
Right.
So.
No. No, I totally agree with that. One card in particular that I think is worth mentioning is Asteroid Mining Consortium. And this card is one in which you can take somebody else's titanium production and add one to yourself. This card can actually be devastating to you if you are going into a space and titanium strategy. The absolute worst is if you're playing Saturn systems and somebody does this to you on turn 1. In fact, it's so devastating when somebody does that I almost feel like they should errata the Saturn systems card to say that your titanium production can't fall below 1. And in fact, I won't choose Saturn systems often if there's another corporation for that very reason, because you can just be absolutely devastated out of the game on turn 1.
I mean, do you remember when that happened?
I do.
I did that.
Yeah, I do remember that. Robbie
so
is still recovering from that.
Yeah, that was so brutal. I mean, yeah, I agree with that. You're hobbled so badly by that because you're depending on that titanium.
Yeah. I think the final thing I would say about this is that unlike microbes, which we sort of agreed was not a very good strategy, I think the space and titanium strategy is very good.
Yeah.
A lot of games are won with this strategy. It does come with some limitations. You can get cut in the draft. If you're playing with cutthroat players, they're going to cut some of the key payoff cards for you.
Especially Jovian cards.
That's right. But it is very powerful if you do it successfully.
Yeah, absolutely. Like I was saying before, these cards are super powerful, and getting them out easily, you're just gonna dominate. So yeah, totally agree.
Good luck with the space and titanium strategy. Yeah. Okay, so the next strategy we're going to talk about is ground game. And ground game is really about using cities, plant tiles, and the concurrent oxygen boost to generate a lot of points.
Right, so let's talk about what kind of configurations you want to achieve with this strategy. So, as you know, ground game, you score points based off of, one, your greenery tiles, and also your cities surrounded by greenery tiles. So, what's the best configuration for that?
Well, clearly the best configuration is the triangle formation,
right,
where you basically have 3 cities surrounding a central point, and then you create places for your plants to go that touch multiple cities at once.
Right.
This is the ideal scenario. It can sometimes be tricky in practice to actually get that to occur because people can build cities where you want to build them. They can place cards that reserve a spot.
Right, like restricted area, for example.
Yeah, or like land claim, something like that.
Right.
Another place that you can place cities is towards the edge of the board, so that you can leave areas to place plants that other people can't leech off of.
Right, and not necessarily the very edge of the board, but close to it.
Right.
Because, since no one can build a city within 2 spaces, you're kind of guaranteeing yourself a certain amount of space surrounding your city.
That's right. In general, if you're going to go for the triangle formation, you want to build 2 cities first and then get the plants in between those cities. And that gives you maximum flexibility to expand your 3rd city either to the left or to the right of those other cities,
right,
thereby trying to avoid getting blocked.
Right, so let's dive into that a little bit more. So when what's the first thing you want to do in the ground game? Generally, what we say is try to get a city down quickly. If you put a greenery tile down, okay, but if you keep doing that, someone's going to snag points from you by placing a city right next to your greenery tiles. So you want to stop that from happening. It's worth mentioning that if you're engaging in heavy ground game, you're going to give away points to people sooner or later, right? People, it's not that hard to place a city next to your greenery, etc. But you don't want to just hand it to them on a silver platter, right?
Right. Yeah, and there's several different ways that you can try and protect yourself from that. One sort of corner case is you can use the Noctis. If you have the Noctis City card in your hand, you can actually build your cities in anticipation of playing Noctis City later, and that's a safe spot that nobody can build on. You can also build your cities near the river, which allow you, not the river, I guess it's the oceans, to try and use that to block people from getting in, making the opportunity cost high for them to try and take 1 point or something like that.
Sure. So yeah, timing is crucial with this, because basically if you don't time this well, you can lose a lot of points.
Yeah, and actually that's a really good point. And one classic way to play ground game is in the generation sequence to try and do a lot of non-ground game moves, wait for everybody to pass their turn, and then you have a relatively free spot to play several cards at once
at the same time
to try and protect your configurations.
Yeah. So what are the kinds of cards we want to play in this strategy? Obviously plants, right? You want a good plant engine. Cards like Heather or Design Microorganisms are really good for this, just for an example. Then another card strategy I think is really good is power. So, and the reason I say that is because city cards are generally going to require at least 1 or sometimes I think even 2 power. So you generally want to build cities using the cards, right? Because it's cheaper than using a standard project. So if you're going to do that, you're going to need energy to do it. And yeah, there's plenty of nice energy cards to play, like Great Dam, for example. And Great Dam actually has the added benefit of having a point in it, which is a deficiency, right?
Yeah, that is, and we'll talk about deficiencies in a minute, but unlike the space strategy or the Jupiter strategy, where a lot of those cards have bonus points on the cards, a lot of the ground game cards don't.
Right.
So if you have ground game cards that have points on them, they're actually really powerful, and those include things like farming and tundra farming, things of that nature.
Right. So I think we both agree that one really crucial card to have with this strategy is protected habitats. It seems like a really innocuous card at first, and it's like, why would I ever play this? But protecting your plants, your greenery production, is a really big deal with this. Because if you've played this game at all, you know that there's so many ways to erase your plants. And it's going to happen, because those are really good cards.
That is so true, and particularly if you're the main person at the table doing a ground game strategy, then you're just going to get the incidental hate from everybody else.
Absolutely.
And the other thing is that protected habitats lets you build up a whole lot of plants so that you can wait for everybody to pass in a generation, and you can lay down 3 or 4 plants at once.
Boom, exactly.
Which can just be huge. Yeah. Other key cards for the ground game strategy, maybe not key cards, but really good cards, are Arctic Algae, which if played early can basically just net you 2 plants. Immigrant City can be really good if you're planning on playing a lot of cities. That just gives you a way to boost your economy. And of course, ground game goes great with Tharsis Republic, which sort of has Immigrant City on its, as the bonus for that corporation. Those are some key cards. Mostly, though, you just want to build your plant production and energy production.
Right. Totally. And so some of the downfalls and pitfalls of the ground game, and we already mentioned this, is point generation, right? Not a lot of these cards have points on them. So where do your points come from? It's all the board, right?
Yeah, or, I think that, if you think about how many points, if you're going for a really pure ground game strategy, how many points do you actually need to win? In our case, in a 3-player game, usually the winner has between 85 to 95 points. So if you assume that your terraforming rating is around in the 40 range with ground game, that's I think being somewhat
Very
optimistic.
generous,
But
yeah.
you're needing to generate somewhere between 30 to 35 points on your ground game to really be competitive,
Right.
and that's assuming that you also pick up either 2 milestones and awards. You need a lot of points out of the ground game to make it work.
Yeah, and we just estimated before this that if you have a perfect triangle configuration like we talked about, and it's completely surrounded with greenery tiles, you're talking maybe 20 points.
Maybe.
And-
I think it's 17 points.
I'm saying if it's perfect,
Yeah.
you're going to get like somewhere around 20 points. And that's just not enough.
It's not enough. When you think about all the ways that people can mess with your plants and mess with your configurations,
Right. Stick a restricted area next to you.
it can be hard to generate the number of points. I think it also, this gets into the pacing of play with ground game. I personally view the ground game strategy as sort of an aggro or aggressive strategy. You want to end the game by generation 9 if you can. Because if people are building a space or titanium strategy or an economy strategy, things that will really give you late game leverage, if that game goes to generation 11 or 12, the ground game player is just completely outpaced. And so the problem with the ground game, in my opinion, is that if you're the only player doing that, then if you're playing with good players, they're going to slow the pace of the game down by not terraforming as much, so that they're going to extend that game to generation 10 or 11 and just make it almost impossible for the ground game player to win.
Right. Well, so I mean, doesn't the ground game player also benefit from a longer game because they have more time to place more tiles, right?
Yeah, I don't think so though, and the reason why I don't think so, I mean, maybe we have a little bit of a disagreement there, but if you're playing, say, an economy strategy where your whole goal in the beginning is to raise your economy level, by the end of the game you could be generating 60, sometimes more credits per turn per generation.
Yeah.
And if that's what happens in those last couple of generations, you can use all those credits to get ground game points of your own. You could just lay a couple cities down and place some
True.
plants, and then all of a sudden you're the ground game player.
Right. Yes, you basically you're letting people with better engines dominate you, I guess is what you're saying.
That's how I feel about it. It is worth mentioning that a lot of the power of a late game strategy is predicated on a draft format, because if you're playing without the draft, I think ground game dominates, because the late game strategies, you just don't see the card combinations with enough frequency to make that happen.
Yeah.
But if you are playing with a draft with good players, I think of the ground game as being a fairly weak strategy.
I mean, that's fair. I agree that it's not the strong. I wouldn't put it in the strong tier of strategies. I don't know. My feelings are sort of changing about it, though. Maybe a little bit. Just a game I was just playing. You place down greenery tiles, and you're building up TR quickly. Especially if you have a nice engine early, and that equals more money. That equals more points, obviously, right? So I don't know. I would agree that it's not top tier, but I don't think it's like a miserable strategy either.
Well, Nima, I hope that you keep employing the ground game strategy against me in the future.
Fine.
Good luck with the ground game. Okay, so the last archetype we're going to talk about today is the economy strategy. And basically, what does that involve?
So basically what we're talking about here is playing cards that are going to increase your credit production, that is going to allow you to play any kind of card you want, any kind of strategy you want. When you have a lot of credit production, a lot of money, you have a lot of flexibility to do what you want.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And so the way that this typically plays out is that as the economy strategy player, you're going to try and build up your mega credit production in the early game through whatever means that you have available to you. Some great cards in this setting are immigration shuttles, acquired company. There's several different types of city cards that let you boost your economy.
Right.
Then basically in the mid game, you just see what people pass you, and you use that money to move into whatever open lane you can find. And then in the late game, you have some extra cash, and you can use that to play some stuff to the board and generate a few points with ground game.
Yeah, I think you had a good point there, which was, make sure you're not going into a strategy someone else is doing. because you're just going to hobble yourself, right? Pick something that's wide open to you. I think that was a good point. So yeah, there's also some fun cards to play that will generate you credit production based off of what other people do. Stuff like Toll Station or Zeppelins, for example. When people play a space card or a city, you reap the benefits without doing a thing. But you also sort of have to read the room and see what people are going for, because those cards aren't worth it at all if, for example, no one's doing cities and you play that card down. You know what I mean?
Yeah, but those cards can just be so punishing, right?
Yeah.
I mean, like, let's say somebody has a really good space titanium Jovian strategy combo going on in the early game,
Yeah.
and you get Toll Station and basically spend 12 credits to jump your. I've seen people get 10 mega credit production off of that card. I mean, that can just be backbreaking to play on turn 4 or 5.
Yeah, but that's difficult, right? Because a lot of times Jovian players will hide that information, right? And you don't know what they're going to do. Maybe you can see that they're playing space cards, for example. Yeah, maybe if they're doing the titanium space route, then Toll Station's a fantastic card to put down.
I actually don't love cards like that in general in games
Yeah.
that are so swingy, because it can feel very punishing if you've gotten out of the gates really quickly with like one of these strategies, and then somebody just totally burns you with those cards.
Right.
On the flip side, like, that's why this is a good strategy, because it just opens you up to maximum flexibility where these very powerful plays can come your way for
Right.
very cheap.
Yeah, so if you can read them, then it's a fantastic thing to do. So like one of the problems with the economic strategy is the milestones and awards, right? Why don't you talk about that?
Yeah, that's actually a limitation, because while this archetype can set you up for the banker award, and really you should win that going away. In fact, if you know that you're going to go into this strategy pretty early based on your initial cards, you should probably just fund that quickly.
Pretty early.
Because it's so great to get it for 8 credits. There isn't a great milestone for the economy strategy.
Right. Yeah, they're generally, centered around building things or getting your cards size really high. So yeah, I think that's partly the balance of this strategy, is because since you have such versatility, I think they balanced it in that the milestones and awards aren't as readily available to you. It's probably a good design choice, honestly.
I think that's totally true. And actually, if you see somebody going into the strategy, it's incumbent on the other players to snap up the milestones early, because one thing that can very easily happen in the mid game is that you've built your economy strategy early, and then you get your terraforming rating up high, either through event cards or other kinds of cards, and then you just back end yourself into the terraformer milestone. If you do that, you're almost always going to win.
Right. I mean, but it should be said that since you are so versatile, and if you have enough money, you can get yourself into a strategy possibly as quickly as someone else is if they're not going down that route. It's really good. There's a lot of ways to go about playing the game with economy.
Yeah, some key cards for this archetype. I mean, there really aren't any specific key cards, because the whole point of it is to be flexible.
Yeah, exactly.
But some really good ones can be standard technology, because if you have a lot of cash at the end, that just gives you a big discount on standard projects.
Yeah, honestly, I think that's a really big card, because generally you might not be going for ground game with this strategy, but that card will make it so much better, right? Because the standard technologies aren't necessarily the best way to get greenery or get cities, but with that card, it's a big deal, especially if you've got a ton of money coming in.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. And another one, if you're not leaning towards ground game, but you're trying to play out more cards, in that setting, Earth Catapult can just be amazing.
Totally. Earth Catapult and shuttles are crucial to make everything 2 to 4 credits cheaper every time. You will save so much money.
Yeah. Also, obviously, the economy archetype pairs amazingly well with Credit Core, because I mean, if you're already getting 4 off, and then you find some of these other ways to cheapen cards, and you're boosting your economy so much, I mean, you can really just kind of run away with it. It can't be emphasized enough that the main advantage of the economy strategy is flexibility.
Yeah.
So allowing, I think for that reason, it is also a difficult archetype to master because there aren't a lot of signposts to tell you exactly what to
which
do.
way to go.
But if you're good and you are able to look at what your opponents are trying to accomplish and you can figure out what's open, this just gives you such flexibility to shape your game to what's happening on the board.
Yeah, I agree. I think it's really good. I think it's a good way to go.
I would actually say that I think that in a vacuum, this is probably the strongest strategy. That's how I feel about it.
I would say it depends on how you started. I mean, I think that's probably true of any strategy in this game. It depends on what you got dealt and what corporation you started with. But yeah, if you can get a really good economy going early, I agree. This is really strong, and it allows you to do almost anything.
I mean, the reason I say that, Nima, is that, like, let's say that you start off with a space titanium strategy, and then, towards like the end of the mid game and early part of the late game, you just don't get space cards. Like that you could end the game with 15 or 18 titanium sitting in your bank account or whatever. I mean, the thing about, I've seen the person going with the economy strategy, like on generation 8, start a Jovian strategy and generate like 20 points off of that.
Right.
Because the thing is, it's just what is dealt to you at that point, right? And that flexibility is just so powerful. I feel like you just can't discount that.
Absolutely. No, I totally agree. This is a really good strategy.
Okay, well, good luck building your economy.
Well, that's it for today, guys. We hope you really enjoyed that. We got one more video on archetypes coming up. That's it for today, and tune in next time. Thanks.
Bye.